Yes, Josh Nelson, park ranger here at the National Historic Site, and basically where I'm coming to you from, Roanoke Island, right? So the coast of North Carolina, and we'll be spending a little bit of time sharing the story about the early English settlement attempts here, which was the first English settlement attempts in North America. Talk a little bit about what we found here on site, talk a little bit of what we are still looking for, and I think maybe we might be interested in some of the theories, right, of where these people went and what happened to them. Of course, that is still at least a little bit of a question for many, so we'll jump into that as well. Happy to take questions, as Fran said. So if you have any, please type those in, and I really enjoy it when I am able to try to answer all of your questions. I have a few. I have a few paintings as well, and so hopefully, maybe Fran, you can just give me some feedback on whether you're able to see these well enough. If I hold this up.
Okay, that looks pretty good.
Pretty good. Okay, so I know it's
a
little bit low tech, but yeah, this is a map showing showing the coast of North Carolina. Now remember, we're going back in time to the 1580s, so we're about 430 plus years ago. At the time, this was Virginia, at least the English called it Virginia. It wasn't until the mid 1660s that it was broken up to the names that we might be more familiar with today, the Carolinas and Virginia territory. But this was considered Virginia. Roanoke Island, where I'm standing right now, is basically in the center of this map. So I'm pointing to it now. It's a small island that's kind of shaded red. To my left, so your right, as you look at the screen, there would be the Outer Banks themselves, this narrow strip of sand, basically. And then beyond that is the Atlantic Ocean. This map that I'm holding here, this is painted in 1585. So this is painted by a man named John White, who was a part of the expeditions, one of the first colonies. He actually later became governor of the Lost Colony as well. Maybe his name is familiar to anyone who's read a little bit about this story. Basically, we see the colony attempts through the eyes of people such as John White, through his paintings. These provide us a kind of a unique perspective of how they saw this place. He left about 80 around, or at least 80 paintings of his still survive today. They are primarily of plants and animals, but you also have some that he painted of the native people that were in this area, this map as well. So it's a fascinating kind of look into history. We also get some of this story from Thomas Harriot. Okay, he was a scientist who was here, and I'll talk a little bit more about him as we go along. We get this story from the perspective of Sir Walter Raleigh and Sir Richard Grenville and some of the noblemen. Sir Francis Drake, actually, in fact, was tied up in this story a little bit. We also get a little bit of this story from ships' journals and logs that do survive from that time. Another big source of information would be archaeology, and where I'm standing right now is really the center of what we have found so far here on Roanoke Island, and I'll jump into that a little bit later on. But I guess, as you may imagine or know already, if you have siblings or a spouse or coworkers or a boss, every individual is going to have their unique perspective, right? And so to begin with, I guess because we have a lot of the information from the perspective of the English, that's where I'd like to begin this morning. I want to think about going back in time 430 plus years and think about the 1580s in England at that moment. What are they trying to accomplish by building settlements in what they call the New World? Before them, right, you have Christopher Columbus sailing under the Spanish flag in 1492, and you have him bumping into land south of here in the Caribbean. From then on, the Spanish are capturing a lot of territory, conquering it, and really they're getting a lot of resources. They're exporting back to Europe sugar and gold, silver, copper. I mean, a number of different things, and this is really increasing their wealth, increasing their power. And England is trying to get a slice of the pie, you could say. All right, they're trying to replicate what the Spanish have done in the Caribbean here in North America. Spanish, they claim this territory, and so the English have to be a little bit careful. When they first arrive, they feel like their main threat is, in fact, from the Spanish. St. Augustine, down in what we call Florida today, has already been built 20 years before the English arrive here. Okay. In fact, the Spanish even traveled through what's now part of North Carolina, also 20 years before. Fort San Juan is an archaeological dig that's ongoing about a small Spanish fort that didn't last a long time, but was in the mountains of North Carolina. So the English are trying to basically slip in, establish themselves, and start to find some of the resources that they can export home. And that's their mission, one of them. The other one is that they want to create a base from which their privateering ships can go out and attack the Spanish vessels that are headed through the Gulf Stream, basically right off the coast, 3 or 4 miles distant from me. And those are headed back home laden with supplies. They want to be able to go out and capture those and then come back and resupply at this base. It would really disrupt the Spanish. They arrive on Roanoke Island in 1584. And this is just a small party. They don't spend a real long time on Roanoke, but they do explore around enough to realize that this is a decent location, they feel. They arrive in the midsummer, and so it's a beautiful weather, probably a little bit warm for them, but beautiful weather, a lot of resources, a lot of plants and animals. They also, a really big reason why they feel this is a good location is the relationship that they had built with the Roanoke people. Even though it was just a few days time, really. They had been welcomed by the Roanoke, they had traded with them, and so they thought that was a positive thing to be able to establish that relationship. So they sail home. They take 2 ambassadors with them. It wasn't forceful. These native people willingly went with them, it appears. And they sail back to England. As they're doing that, basically some of the English are learning the Algonquian language, and the Algonquian are learning the English language. So there's starting to be a little bit of communication going on. The next year, the first attempt at a colony is sent forth. And Sir Richard Grenville, he's commanding this. He comes over to Roanoke Island. There's 600 soldiers primarily, but only 107 are left behind. And if you've heard of the Lost Colony before, I guess I want to be clear that we aren't there yet. So this is still the first colony in 1585. John White, the artist, right, who painted that map, he's a part of this expedition. Beyond soldiers, they have a group of scientists. They have Thomas Harriot. They have a man named Joachim Gans, and he was a metallurgist. His job was to find that copper, that gold, that silver. Behind me, about 50 feet, we've discovered the workshop site for these 2 men, which is pretty fascinating, and I'll tell you a little bit more as we go along. And their job is really just to understand this place, right? To learn about it, to explore around, to see what resources are here to be able to export back home. And they do a fantastic job at that. I mean, they travel 100 miles inland. They travel up to the southern shore of the Chesapeake Bay, in fact, and spend a couple of months there. They do learn a lot. They create the map, such as I showed you. What the English didn't spend a lot of time with, though, was gathering food. And they had primarily relied on the Roanoke people, the tribe that lived here on this island, and also they had a village about 2 miles distant to my right or your left on the mainland. And the Roanokes in the beginning willing to provide that food, but as time went on, this relationship really just started to break down. Possibly because the Roanokes were running low on food as it turned from summer to winter. Possibly because they kind of got fed up. I mean, think about it. Have you ever had a house guest that spent just a little bit too long at your place and you're ready to have them leave? Another big thing too was illness. And of course, neither party really understood what was happening. But the English were bringing illnesses over with them, even things such as the flu and the common cold. The native populations had never seen that before. Their bodies were not resistant. And so their people were getting sick, and many were dying from it. And they didn't understand what it was, but the Roanoke certainly knew that it was because of these new people. And so that was a reason they started to distance themselves. They actually abandoned their village here on Roanoke, and they moved to their other village 2 miles away. the commander of the English starts to get suspicious and feels that he's actually going to be attacked. And so he does attack first. This starts the war between the Roanoke tribe and the English. At that moment, the English are in a pretty bad spot, even though they still have other native tribes that they are at least neutral with at this point. They really lost their main source of food, and their homes where they built their base was right next to the Roanoke people. And so this was not good. They were desperate, in fact. The fleet that they had expected, the resupply fleet, it hadn't shown up. When they finally saw vessels off the coast, it actually ended up being Sir Francis Drake, who had been down in the Caribbean attacking the Spanish. He stopped here because he knew his buddy, Sir Walter Raleigh, had been trying to establish a colony here. And so he stopped, originally with the plan to resupply it. But as time went on, a storm hit and things changed. Basically, this colony decides to leave, and they abandon Roanoke Island. And that really is the end of the first attempt. They set sail. Ironically, just days later, the resupply fleet that they had expected showed up and found nobody here. And so they actually left 15 men behind. Obviously, those 15 had no idea that a war had started with the local tribe. They found out quickly. We learned later. And so obviously that didn't go too well for them either. But the English, they had learned a lot while they were here, and they had realized that the Chesapeake Bay, farther north, was probably a better location for a settlement. The next attempt, so now we're at the point where we're talking about the colony today, talk as the lost colony. This is a group of civilians, so the composition is really different. We don't have soldiers and scientists. We have John White, the governor, who's the artist from the first group. He's promoted, so he's governor, but it's civilians. Families are coming over for the first time, and these are people probably inspired primarily because of just the promise of land. It seems these people were promised up to 500 acres, and they wouldn't have owned land at home. So this would have been a way to increase their social status, a way to basically better their future. And so this is one of the motivations that's bringing them over here. Remember, they want to go to the Chesapeake Bay, so they set sail. At that time, ships would sail generally south, west to the Caribbean, and then north, following the Gulf Stream, getting here to Roanoke Island. It took about 3 months for these people to sail all of that way. They did make a stop down in the Caribbean, would resupply typically. John White knew that a small group had been left at Roanoke Island. And so he stops here just to make contact with them, not to build his colony. But then he writes in his journal that when they arrive, the pilot of the vessels, whose name was Simon Fernandez. Simon was a Portuguese pilot who basically had a hatred of the Spanish his entire life and had offered his services to the English. He had been the one that had piloted many of the voyages over to Roanoke Island already. So he really, out of anyone England had, he was probably the most experienced pilot to come over here. But John White says that when he arrives, the pilot, Simon, wouldn't take him farther. He claims that the pilot told him it was too late in the season and that they would have to make do on Roanoke Island. So they decide they're going to rebuild the homes from the first expedition. They're going to make the best of it for a short time before moving to a new location. Remember that, though, because this group, the Lost Colony group, never intended to stay on Roanoke Island. They never even intended to start here. That's, I think, important. Now, while they're here, a couple of things happen that are pretty promising for them. They end up actually baptizing a Croatoan native named Manteo, or Manteo. You'll hear it pronounced both ways. And the Croatoans lived on where we call Cape Hatteras today. It's about 50 miles south. They had remained friendly with the English the entire time, still had a pretty strong relationship. And so Manteo is baptized and given a title of Lord. Ironically, he actually outranks everybody except for Governor White. They also have the first English child born, Virginia Dare. She is John White's granddaughter. Okay, so his daughter had come over with her husband, first child born in what they call the New World. There was a second baby born as well, and we don't know that baby's gender or name, in fact, but there were two babies born. And the English, they feel that this is a hopeful sign of the future, right? Because what is their goal? They want to build a permanent settlement here. So they want to have families that are lasting. But they realize they only have 117 people. They're pretty short on supplies because of one of their ships had run aground. And so they need more. And they all vote to have their governor go back home. So he set sail. He's only spent 5 weeks with the colony. Ironically, he actually set sail on the same vessels that were piloted by Simon Fernandez that had been waiting offshore for him. But they set sail, they go back to England. He's hopeful that he'll come back within 6, 7, 8 months. Basically enough time to sail home, gather supplies, and then come back over again. That was 1587. 1588 is an event called the Spanish Armada. This is basically when Spain, King Philip of Spain, is looking to invade England. Queen Elizabeth is aware of this, and just before the vessels that were intending to come to Roanoke set sail, Queen Elizabeth commands that all ships remain in port, and they're there to defend the country against the Spanish Armada. And so really what you have is this world event, right? This large event impacting dramatically the resupply or the rescue, you could say, of the Roanoke colony. John White is really helpless. He can't do anything about that. He does make a brief attempt in 2 small privateering vessels with 17 other colonists to try to come back over here just to make contact with them. But those are privateering vessels. They're bent on attacking other ships. They actually get attacked and are forced back to England. John White is nearly killed in a battle that's occurring at that time. Finally, after the Spanish Armada, after the Spanish fleet has been defeated by the English, but also weather was a big part of that. In 1590, John White is finally able to get on board another larger privateering vessel that's going to agree to stop here at Roanoke Island. So imagine this, he's just part of the crew. He's one of them. He doesn't have extra supplies. He doesn't have any other colonists to come over here, but at least he can try to make contact with his colony, with his family, or at least part of his family. He spends the summer in the Caribbean attacking the Spanish, as the English were doing at that time. They arrive at Roanoke Island. They don't find a whole lot here. He describes in his journal walking up a sandy bank and finding letters carved in a tree, CRO. He says that he walked to the settlement location. They had enclosed it with a big wooden wall. On the gatepost was carved Croatoan. And he says that inside, walking inside, they didn't find very much there. He said the houses had been taken down. Now listen to that, taken down. Okay, those are the exact words he uses. And to me, to many, what he's telling us is that these people basically pack up and move. All right. So he sees those 2 carvings, CRO, Croatoan. He thinks, all right, well, this is the native tribe 50 miles south. This is the location 50 miles south. Both were named the same. It's not far. Let's go down there and try to make contact. He asked the captain of the vessel to take him, and the captain agrees. Bad weather rolls in. This is a area known for bad storms, possibly hurricane. We don't know. It would have been the right time of year. But anyways, the ship gets hit by this massive storm, nearly wrecks the ship. It forces them well off the coast because it's safer to be out in deep water than close to shoreline. And when this storm finally ends, the captain apparently just decides that he's not going to come back. John White is again kind of powerless because he's just a passenger on board the vessel. He's not in control. And so he goes home to England. After this, he has no more money. He's not able to convince other people to come back over here. The investors such as Sir Walter Raleigh and some of the other noblemen and merchants, they hadn't had a return from these investments, and they lost interest. And so really what you see is no major effort to come back and try to locate this group. There's feeble attempts where a single ship might be tasked with stopping here on the coast to try to locate them, but they never make contact with anybody here. And that's basically what we know from the English side of things, and that's primarily from those journal accounts, from the brief and true report of Thomas Harriot. He wrote. It's kind of like a scientific report almost, which is pretty neat actually. And it's also from those paintings that we have. Imagine though for a minute this whole story from a different point of view. Imagine this as if you were living on Roanoke Island for your entire life. Okay, you're one of the people here. You survive by growing corn. You hunt bear, deer. You go out into the waters and fish. That's actually a big part of your diet is fish. And one day you're out at the ocean. You look into the water and you see, call it a giant canoe. They've passed from time to time, but today it's different because there are this canoe is stopped. People are coming to shore. They look completely different than you. They dress differently. They speak differently. You watch them for 3 days. On the third day, you step out and you show yourself, you gesture that you'd like to meet them. Despite how different they are, you welcome them back to your home. You provide a meal for them. You look at some of the items they're carrying with them, and you think that might be valuable to your people. You see some of their weapons. You think, aha, this could help me defend my land from enemies farther inland. And so you start trading with them. Now, they don't spend a long time here. They leave. You go back with them. Imagine that. Imagine you leave here, the coast of Carolina, and you go back to England. Never been there before. It's totally different, totally new. You come back to your home. There's more strangers this time. They build homes right next to your village. Things go okay in the beginning, but as time goes on, you run lower and lower on food, and they keep demanding more and more. For some reason, whenever these strangers visit your villages, you notice that your people start getting sick and they start dying. One morning, you're at your main village. It's called Decimunkapiak. It's 2 miles from here. And you suddenly get attacked by these strangers. Your chief, Wingina, is killed in the battle. Just after that, the strangers leave. But a little while later, they come back again. And this time they have families with them, right? What does that mean? Does it mean that they want to spend more time here? They have kids with them. So I guess I want to be clear that we don't have the specific feelings or thoughts of what the Roanoke, or really for that matter, any of the tribes in the area felt when these English were arriving. This is kind of filling in the blanks, if you will. There are some depictions of them. And so I want to show you a couple of more of John White's paintings. This is a werewance, if you're using the Algonquian language, or a chief. And it's very likely that this is Chief Wingina. Wingina was the chief of the Roanoke, and he was the one that was killed in the battle with the English. This was painted in 1585, before they were at war, painted by John White, and one of the surviving paintings of his. You may note too that he's wearing this large plate around his neck, and it's copper. This was the English learned quickly that copper was an incredibly prized possession on the part of the native, and that was one of their primary trade goods that they brought over with them. We have found a copper necklace here in the park. The copper was made in England, but was likely used by the native people, worn by the native people. And I want to show you this other painting of a village. Now, this particular one is called Pamiak. John White only painted 2 villages, at least only 2 survive. This particular one was on the mainland and a little ways distant. So the reason I show you this one, though, is we think, based on the English's description, that Roanoke village, the one probably real close to where I'm standing, looked similar. We know it was circular. It had a small wooden wall around the outside. And then it did have homes on the inside, only probably about 9 homes. So it would have been a little smaller. You know, and these images, they look, I mean, they're fascinating. First of all, you can learn an incredible amount from them. There's a lot of detail included by John White, but they seem fairly accurate. But we do have to remember that they are from the perspective of the English. And the reason I approach this story in this way is because with the last part of this story, the what happened part, what we've had over the years is, starting in 1590 with John White's accounts, after that, it's just a lot of unknowns where people are able to speculate and kind of fill in the blanks a little bit, or try to. And you end up finding that any number of people who have written books about the story or produced a documentary about the story or just researched it in general, they all have their own perspective that they bring to it. And this leads to many possibilities, many theories that really, I mean, we can't prove or disprove necessarily yet. So each perspective is going to be a little bit unique, and you can find that some will really highlight pieces of information, or discredit some pieces of information to meet their story that they're trying to create, or the narrative that they're trying to create. I guess today, I think what I can do is share some of the most talked about theories and some of the ones that have the most evidence, either through historical record or through archaeological digs that support them. And really that breaks down into three, I would say. One of those is likely assimilation. And frankly, this is the most the highest chance of survival for these people is likely assimilating with a native tribe, or at the very least learning from them. And from my point of view, if you're learning from somebody, you're learning how to survive here, it's probably not a long time before you just become part of that group, realistically. Now, where that could have happened, well, we could follow the carvings that were left behind by John, or seen by John White, that indicated they had moved to Croatoan, Cape Hatteras today. And it's a likely story, right? At least that some go there. Manteo, right, was down there, and he was friendly to the English. He could have provided a lot of support for them, so it makes sense in that way. We also find that there have been archaeological digs down there. They have discovered some English items from the correct time frame. Part of the trouble, though, is because we had the colony 2 years before the lost colony, and we know that they went down there as well. It's hard to distinguish just between 2 years on some of those items that have been found. You have an account from John Lawson in 1701 who lands on Cape Hatteras, and he talks about meeting the native people there, and they talk about their ancestors who could speak from books. And he says some of them have gray eyes among them. And he thinks that this is indication that the lost colony group had mixed with the native people, and basically he was seeing their ancestors, their descendants. What another possibility is that this group, or at least some of them, moved 50 miles inland. The map that I showed you at the beginning, if you look really closely on it, about 50 miles away, there is a patch. Now, patches were used by artists to make a correction. And you'll actually notice that there are two patches if you look closely at that map, which, by the way, is called the Virginia Pars map. So you could find that online if you'd like. There are two patches. One of them is just simply covering up a mistake or making an edit. The second one, 50 miles inland from where I'm standing, when researchers looked basically through that with infrared light, without removing the patch, they were able to see what was underneath in 2012, or maybe 2010. Anyways, they discovered basically that underneath there was a painting that appeared to be a fort. Actually, there was also a second painting that at least had either faded completely, or maybe more mysteriously was with invisible ink on top of the patch, also appearing to be a fort. Okay, we know that John White in his journal stated, at my departure, they intend to move 50 miles into the main. A lot of people interpret that as mainland. Likely it would. So this patch is about that distance. And so it led to archaeologists digging in that location. Site X and Site Y is what they've basically termed it. Site X and Site Y, archaeologists have been looking at for a number of years now. And last fall, what they believe they've discovered is enough items from the correct time to show that a few people lived there. And that would only be the lost colony group. That's the only possibility for people living there at that time. We know the first colony went through that area, but they never spent any time there. They just traveled through. So possibly some went that direction. There's another, I would say the third most talked about is north. remember, this group, they didn't want to spend their time here. They already knew that by the time they arrived, they knew that a war had started with the Roanokes. In fact, one of their members had been killed initially when they first got to the island by the Roanoke people, probably retaliation against their chief's death. And so they didn't want to stay here. They wanted to go to the Chesapeake Bay. This group was left with a small ship. They had the ability to take 2 or 3 trips and get up there. You have to wait 20 years before you can pick up that thread of the story, though, because 20 years later, 1607, Jamestown is built off of the Chesapeake Bay. It's the first permanent English settlement, the one that lasts for quite some time. And John Smith from that colony, he's told to try to learn what happened to the lost colony group. He's told by basically England, look for them, look for survivors, or look for information on what happened to them. And so he learns from Powhatan. Powhatan was the leader in that area. His daughter was Pocahontas. Powhatan tells him that, well, he actually tells him a few things. He says that there are men clothed, indicating they would be survivors, basically in this vicinity by Roanoke. But he also says that just before Jamestown was built, his tribe had attacked a neighboring tribe, and it ended up killing colonists that were a part of it. And so maybe some went to that area and were caught up in conflict with the native people. Powhatan showed John Smith a couple of English items to try to prove that this story was true. Ultimately, today, we don't know. It's such a vast area. Archaeological digs have not taken place. There's potential that Powhatan is just trying to show how powerful he is, right? And he wants to show the English that he could wipe them out if he so chose. We don't know, but that is still a real possibility, just because we knew it was where they intended to go initially. I think when it comes down to this, what I like to try to get across is that even though the events can be the same, depending on the way you look at it, you can really change the story and therefore the outcome with this. As time goes on, I don't know if we'll ever fully be able to capture the entire picture of what happened to this group, or at least where they went. I think we will certainly learn more. That work will primarily focus on archaeology, is my belief. There may be some more historical record that hasn't been found yet, but I think archaeology is going to be a big way that we do find out more. It continues at those 3 locations that I mentioned. So on Hatteras Island at times, 50 miles away at Site X at times, and also here at Fort Raleigh. Where I'm standing now, you may notice that behind me, there's just a low earthen wall. This is a reconstruction of an earthen fort. It's on the site where one was built in the 1580s. I'll be honest that we aren't exactly clear on which group built it and what its purpose was. Most likely it was built in 1585 by that first colony. And it was probably just a small defensive structure, maybe a couple of cannons mounted in it. This terrain would have looked very different at the time, and you would have been able to see out into the water, which is really not that distant. But with the trees, you are not able to see it today. Now, this was discovered I should say that the archaeological dig was in the late 1940s. But even through the American Civil War, there was a faint outline of where a ditch had been to a fort in this area. So this site has always been talked about as the location of Sir Walter Raleigh's colonies, the lost colony, these English attempts. In the 1990s and also in the 2000s, other digs have really told us a little bit more and given us a better picture of what's happening all around this fort. It wasn't simply just a small earthen fortification. What we know now is that basically just behind where the camera is, so in front of me by feet, there was a charcoal pit. This is where they would have been burning down wood into charcoal to be able to use in a furnace. The furnace, well, just off, let me turn the camera just slightly. So you can follow this this earthen berm, that's the fort. And then just on the end of that, basically on the other side of the path, there's no reconstruction there today. There's nothing visible, but that was where a small metallurgy shop was. Almost without a doubt, this is where Joachim Gans the Jewish metal worker that came over with the English, and Thomas Harriot, that scientist, were working. We've discovered that there were bricks there from their furnace. We've discovered crucible shards, basically just a type of pottery that could withstand heat. There's been glass shards discovered. There's been seeds, ironically. Okay, seeds over 400 years old were found there. And so really what we believe is they're melting down iron ore. They're trying to find metals, copper, gold, silver, you name it, anything. They're looking at the plants to see if there's any medicinal value for these plants in the area, and also probably what ones grow well. And so that's kind of the center of where they're learning about this place. We also know that around this fort, they were doing small scale brick making and distilling. Okay, so we've discovered a workshop site. We've discovered an industrial site, small but industrial. Here's what we don't know. We don't know where their houses were built. They talk about the fort, and they only mention one. At this point, we aren't clear if this is it or if this was just one of the forts that they built. Maybe they had a larger one somewhere else and this was just really small and they never mentioned it. But they say that wherever the fort was, they built their homes around it. They don't tell us exactly how far around it. And really today, that's one of the main things that's being looked for is evidence of habitation. Yes, they worked here, they were here on site, but where did they live? There's potential that it was just hundreds of feet away, if that. There's also a chance that it was maybe a mile or so. So it's one of the things that will continue to be looked at as time goes on. I think now maybe if we stop for a minute. Are there any questions that have come up as I've been talking?
Well, let me look. No.
Okay.
No, I don't believe we do.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, as I'm maybe going along here, if there are questions, I'd kind of like to take the last part of this and make it a little bit more of a conversation if you have those questions, and try to answer some of the things that you might be still wondering about. But that I guess is a picture of what is here at Fort Raleigh, what's been discovered, what is still being looked for. One thing that may hamper, I guess, that effort is just the erosion that we see today at Fort Raleigh. The north end of Roanoke Island, so behind me, it's eroding in some places about 1 foot every year. And it's an incredibly fast rate. So we know that 3,000 feet of shoreline have eroded since the 1580s in some places. That's led a few of the archaeologists to speculate that the settlement site and potentially other information about these colonies basically has been lost over time and has been washed out into the water. And that's a distinct possibility.
Well, Josh, we have a question from Richard. Have any burial sites been found?
Great question. If we're talking about native burials, yes, in the park, we have discovered them. It doesn't appear that these were mass burial sites, so we're not talking a conflict necessarily. We're just talking a couple of small burial plots that were from the Roanoke tribe, likely. We have not found either here at Cape Hatteras or at Site X any burial or remains of an English person. Which actually I think kind of brings up a point that's worth making, that people have often, if they've heard anything about this story, they've heard massacre theories. And it's not impossible because of the stories from Jamestown, because we know the Roanoke tribe was at war with the English. But based on both written record and what has been found archaeologically here at Fort Raleigh, it appears that this group spent 6 or 7 months at most on Roanoke Island and then departed relatively intact. Not because they were forced out, but because they simply wanted to. Things that would support that is kind of getting back to that question, is that there haven't been burials found. There haven't been sites where the English bodies have been discovered. No evidence of conflict here, on at least so far. The the fact that John White, when he came back, he wrote that he found those carvings, but he also wrote that if the colonists had been under attack or if they had been in distress in any way, they were supposed to carve a cross above where they had gone. And that was a sign of distress. He didn't find those. He said the houses were taken down. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm under attack, I'm not going to be taking down my house and moving away. I'm going to be running, right? So that's also showing us that they were probably, it was an orderly move away from this island. The other thing, as far as the time frame, St. Augustine in Florida, the Spanish sent 2 expeditions to look for this colony. Obviously, they were not going to help them out if they found them. They were going to try to wipe them out. But they set sail. 1588 is an interesting one because they sail up past this area. They go to the Chesapeake Bay. They think that's where the English are going to be. Remember, that's where the English wanted to be. They don't find anybody. They come back down along the coast, and as they're sailing home, they do find evidence the English had been here. And this is in the spring of 1588. And unless the English had gotten forewarning somehow and basically hid, it's unlikely. It's more likely that they had already left this area. That was a really long answer maybe to that simple question.
A really good question.
Yes.
Well, Janice asks, what inlet did they pass through to get to Roanoke Island from the ocean in the 1580s?
Yeah, so the territory here changes constantly and fast. Even within people's lifetimes that have been around, are alive today, they've seen inlets be made and fill in. The inlet that was used by the colonists was named Port Fernandez. And basically, if you're driving along the seashore, you're driving past a lighthouse called Body Island Lighthouse, that's where it would have been. There's a little marker there. And today, the closest inlet is about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile south of that location, and it's called Oregon Inlet. So if you're looking at a modern day map, you can find Oregon Inlet and then tell, all right, it was just a little bit north of that. That was the one that they used primarily. It was the easiest one for them to navigate, although they did have issues coming in and out of that inlet a couple of times. Yeah, good question.
Okay. Trevor has asked, oh, this is a big one. What happened to the native tribes? Are any still around? And if so, have they handed down any stories?
Yeah, that's a great question, and an incredibly complex question too. I can say that individually, the Roanoke, the Croatoan, the Choanoke, the Wapimeok, these individual tribes that the English met and interacted with, they don't survive as a distinct group. However, there are absolutely people in the area that can trace their lineage back to these tribes. No specific stories don't survive on at least how the native people were reacting or feeling about their interactions with the English. We don't have information like that, but there are certainly traditions that tell the people around today that they descend from the lost colonists. So you will certainly find that. So you'll find kind of general traditions that are held among some native groups, but nothing real specific as far as the colonies and the interactions.
Okay. The Baileys ask, what do we know about the long-term legacy of the Roanoke and Hatteras natives?
The period when the English arrive, so I'm going to have to back up a little bit to maybe better answer that. When the English arrive, they make note that the tribes were I think they might use the word depleted, or they use a word like that. And really what they're telling us is that these tribes, they had been having some conflicts among them. And so war had been basically leading up to when the English meet them first. The English are here. The illness that they are introducing for that short period of time is certainly impacting them. And the English are writing about how scores of people are dying from that interaction. Obviously, the English can't understand what's going on, but they do realize that it's from them arriving that these people are getting sick. Then you don't really have any other Europeans coming back into this area between or at least spending any time in this area between the 1580s and the 1660s, at which point there are other conflicts. There's other periods where diseases are transmitted. And really, I guess what I'm getting to is that as time goes on, by the early 1800s, the Hatteras tribe, which would have been the Croatoan tribe, but just Europeans had named them something different by this point, there were hardly any people left. There was so few people. And really just through warfare and illness, we see this where these groups kind of just broke apart. There was very few people left. And so they did other tribes, like today you'll find the Lumbee or the Melungeon. This is groups that are recognized, and people in them can trace lineage back to Hatteras and others. But they aren't those unique groups anymore. As time has gone on, I think, well, let me say it this way. There was a long period of time that those people were pushed aside out of society. Okay. And as time has gone on, there's started to be more inclusion, and I think more recognition. And so I think you're starting to see more and more shared about their story, and more focus put in back on them again, as there should be. But for a long time, they were cast out of society by those in power.
Okay, McKenna asks, is it possible that the colonists could have attempted to travel back to England on their own and simply didn't make it?
Yeah, there is. So the colonists had the small ship. They would not have been able to fit everybody on it. It was a pinnace. Now, a pinnace is it's a word or term used to describe different types of vessels. So many times when you hear pinnace, you're talking like just a small open boat, literally, and that wouldn't make it across an ocean. When the English are coming over, when they use the word pinnace, they're also talking about something a little bit larger that would have had decks on it. And the one that came over here did sail across the Atlantic. So yes, it was seaworthy. Could it have fit many people? No, 20 or fewer probably. So you would have had to construct another vessel. Not impossible. As crazy as this sounds, they would have likely had the skill and the expertise with them. There's a possibility that the crew of that vessel remained behind, because we know out of that colony there was 89 men, there was 17 women, there were 9 boys, and then the 2 babies born. And so, yeah, okay, we can understand that there'd probably be more men at that time anyways, but there's also a fair chance that the crew of the vessel is making up part of that contingent of men. So they had the skills likely, and yeah, they could have built another vessel and tried to sail home. If that was the case, clearly they didn't make it, and so they would have been lost at sea. Just to I guess show you that it's not out of the realm of possibility. There was a resupply fleet to Jamestown, and we're talking in the early 1600s, that shipwrecked in Bermuda. They actually salvaged part of what was left of the ship and rebuilt another one, and then finally got here. So yeah, it could have been done, and may have been done.
Okay. Would DNA tests provide information about assimilation into the native culture? Has any underwater archaeology been attempted around the island? And then, great job, Josh. Thank you.
Yeah. So kind of 2 questions. DNA is, yeah, it's been tried. It's honestly, as far as I'm aware, they're continuing to work on that. At this point, nothing really conclusive has been discovered from it. And I would say that the challenges that remain are really 2 things. One, today there's no person that's been able to prove that they descend from a relative of a lost colonist. The records may still be there somewhere, but they haven't been found in England, or they've been lost. I mean, think about the 1600s in England. You have civil wars and religious civil wars. A lot of churches were burned, and where would you keep records? In churches. So there's not a lot of record. Finding somebody that was a descendant of a relative is going to really be your best bet, particularly if you can find a Y chromosome. Without that information, you don't have a specific DNA signature. So at that point, then you're looking in the native populations here for just general info. You're looking at, well, you know, did these people mix with English? Hey, bud, if you want to just step off the wall, you can be on the inside, okay? Thanks. Sorry about that. But the big question is when, so you could say that, yes, English blood is mixed in with the native people, but when did it happen? Is it in the 1580s or is it in the 1670s? That's much harder to distinguish. The other thing too is that historically, and this may be changing, but historically, native tribes have really had little interest in DNA testing, because as time went on, as they were basically pushed to the fringe of society early, you know, in our country's history. Hey, really, we cannot climb the fort. Thanks. They received a lot of their recognition through oral tradition stating that they descended from Lost Colony and English, basically. There would be little reason for them to get DNA tested, because it may or may not support their tradition that they've held for a long time, right? And then they don't really gain anything if it supports it, and they could lose something if it doesn't support it. So that's what we found in the past. That could change as time goes on, though.
And then is there such a thing as underwater archaeology?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was the second part of that question.
That was the other part. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Sure. Yeah, I mean, we off the coast of Roanoke here, there have been underwater surveys done. There hasn't been a ton found, but a few items have been discovered. And really those items would be things that have eroded out of the bank and then been deposited in the water. So yeah, we have found things, not a lot. And so they really haven't given us a too much of a additional information, but a few items were found.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
Eric says, excellent presentation, Josh. Thank you so much. You get lots of exclamation marks.
You're welcome.
Let's see. Did anyone else survive the attack or none did? I'm not sure which attack.
Let's see. Well, I mean, I mentioned the attack on the Roanoke that the English made. And in that, yes, some people died. The English didn't suffer any casualties. Really, the only account we have of an individual would be Wingina, the chief. Beyond that, we just know that other natives were killed in it. The other, I guess I mentioned too, that when the Lost Colony arrived, one of their members was killed by probably the Roanoke in retaliation, it seems. And that was George Howe. He was out by himself away from the colony. He was collecting crabs in the water. And so he's basically pretty vulnerable on his own. Not really paying attention likely to what was going on around him, but the crabbing, and was killed. Those were the two I mentioned. So I guess maybe that provides a little bit more detail about those two conflicts.
Okay, what do you know about the Dare stones? I don't know anything about Dare stones. Do you believe they are from the colonists?
Yeah, good question. So I'm really, to answer this, let me back up just a little bit and describe briefly for everybody what the Dare stones are. It's a series of 42 stones that have been discovered starting in 1937 through the 1940s. These stones, if true, are carved purportedly by Eleanor Dare, who is the mother of Virginia Dare, the daughter of John White. And it records a history of what happened to the colony, if true. It's a bleak picture, frankly. The first stone was discovered about 40 or 50 miles from Roanoke Island, close to Edenton, North Carolina. And it's a stone where supposedly Eleanor Dare is stating that that the colony was attacked, that there are only a handful of survivors left, and her husband and Virginia Dare have also died. if anybody finds the stone and gives it to John White, there will be a reward. That's a rough paraphrasing of what's on the stone. So that's found in 1937. It's brought, well, it was found by a tourist coming through the area. Supposedly he stopped on the side of the road. It's unclear whether he was going to the bathroom or picking berries or something, but he finds this stone. He takes it and he throws it in his trunk of his car, drives around for a little while, and then eventually shows up at a university in Georgia, brings it into the professors there and shows them. They look at it for a little while. It's not super clear to read, and so they eventually are able to make it out and start getting really excited about what this could be. They put out word that, hey, this was found. If more are discovered, bring them to us. There may be a reward. Shockingly, more start to show up. Right? And eventually you get those other 41 stones. They are discovered in North Carolina, stretching through South Carolina, and eventually ending up in Georgia, ironically not far from the university that he brought it to. And it's this long story of really, it's just not a pleasant picture. By the end, there's only like, I think, 2 surviving. I guess with this, what I like to share is try to just provide a little bit of context about what's happening at that time related to this story. So 1937, it was not a national park yet. At that point, this was a state park. We had a group in the late 1800s purchased just a few acres where I'm standing now to protect this story. And in the late 1800s, early 1900s, it really was, there was a big focus on the origins of the United States. And the English origins were really highlighted. And so this property is protected. This story starts to be shared. It becomes a state park. During the Great Depression, the Civilian Conservation Corps and the WPA are here. They have a camp actually just about a mile from where I'm standing. They are doing construction both along the National Seashore. It's not the National Seashore yet. They're working on the seashore. They're also working on the Waterside Theater. Now in the park today, we still have a theater. It's a newer version, but where they put on the outdoor drama, The Lost Colony. When did that start? 1937, the very same year that the first stone was discovered. Also in that year, on the anniversary of Virginia Dare's birth, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt visited Fort Raleigh State Park, went and attended the Lost Colony outdoor drama on its opening year, and the stone had been discovered just weeks before this. The person who discovered it was lost to history. They tried to track him down and they could not find him, even hiring private detectives, which is weird, I guess. and we know that he made either $500 or $1,000 off of that initial stone, and that prompted the other stones likely. Also think about the Great Depression. $500 or $1,000 is a lot of money, so there's a big incentive for this. What I can say is this: 41 out of the 42, almost everybody will tell you they are complete fakes. Some of them are clearly made with power tools, just a tool that they wouldn't have had back at the time. The first one, the one found in Edenton or outside of it, if it's a fake, it's a good one. Providing all that context, I think, helps paint a little bit better picture of possible inspiration of why that was found at that time. But you will find a lot of people debating that first one on whether it's authentic or not. And that's kind of where I'll end it.
That is cool. Let's see. How far into North Carolina did the Spanish explore in the 16th century? Where in North Carolina is the archaeological dig you mentioned?
Great question. And I guess I can't provide a great answer for you because I don't remember the town, the closest town to where that site is. Fort San Juan, if you look that up, you should be able to find it. The Spanish didn't travel through much of what's now North Carolina, but the route that they believe they took would have kind of clipped just the western side of it just a little bit. And anyways, yeah, so Fort San Juan, you can look that up. That's the archaeological dig. There was a small Spanish outpost. I don't believe it lasted a long time, but I really haven't researched that very much at all. So I can't answer more than that. It is an interesting little tidbit though, that I think many just don't realize, kind of the complexity of how many different European powers were attempting expeditions and colonies here in North America at around this same time. So it's a pretty complex and pretty messy history, frankly.
Well, you are just a master of it all. Barbara says, thank you for your time and your information.
Absolutely.
Susan says, very interesting information and presentation. Thank you, Josh. Lisa, this has been wonderful. I've learned so much. Thank you for sharing your knowledge with us.
You're welcome.
And that looks like all I've got.
Okay.
That's
Okay.
Anything else that you want to tell us?
Well, I think that really what I'll just wrap up with is that, I mean, first of all, the story I've shared, there's so much more depth to it. I've spent my entire time here researching, and there's still more. So it's really just a fascinating story. But also Fort Raleigh, this historic site covers much more than simply the lost colony. Briefly just mention that another big part of our history that we share here is the Civil War battle of Roanoke Island. This is part of the Union Army's, or really Navy's, plan, excuse me, to blockade southern ports and strangle the trade of the South. But along the coast here, where it's just incredibly dangerous to have ships, they actually ended up taking over both Cape Hatteras and here at Roanoke Island. Eventually, they moved inland to New Bern and Plymouth and other towns, and they occupied quite a bit of land in eastern North Carolina during the war. This was early on, too. And so what it inspired was many enslaved people made their way here in what we could call the Underground Railroad, but they were headed east. They ended up establishing a freedmen's colony on Roanoke Island. There's 3,500 people that lived here through the war. So that's a really big part of our history. There was also, in 1902, a gentleman named Reginald Fessenden who was doing wireless voice transmissions here from Roanoke Island down to Cape Hatteras. So just a really unique and diverse history that's happened here at the park, and we do the best job we can of trying to share all of that with everybody. So that, I think it's a neat thing to add.
Yeah, that's something that I don't think would be expected off the coast of North Carolina during the Civil War.
Yeah, you know, to have such a small little historic site be talking about the beginnings of English America, and also the American Civil War and the Underground Railroad. I mean, talk about two incredibly pivotal moments in shaping and creating the country that we are today, and they're both captured with part of the history here. So it's pretty amazing.
You may have a whole lot of folks from Salem, Virginia come visit you this summer.
I
hope so.
I hope so, yes.
We had just a couple more comments that have come in. The Bailey say maybe this is where the fort was that you're speaking of, Morgantown, North Carolina.
Okay.
Maybe.
I'm not real familiar with it, I'll be honest. So I guess I can't comment. Yeah.
From Nathan, I appreciate the detail of what you've shared and the care you have given to providing context and basis for facts or theories. And Lucy says, great presentation.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, with this story, there are a lot of different resources, but really what I try to do is just go back to simply what was stated by the people here, and build off of that as much as you can, and just focusing on that. It's that alone is enough to tell a great story, I think.
Oh, and this comment, this may be our last one, but this one's fantastic. Your presentation reminds me once again why the National Park Service is one of our country's most beloved institutions. Thank you again.
Hey, you are welcome. It's a job that I certainly love. So I'm a little biased, but I think national parks are pretty cool too.
And it's hard to believe you've only been there 2 years. The depth of your knowledge is incredible.
It's if you're passionate about learning, yeah, you can do a lot in a little bit of time.
Goodness. Well, I thank you very much. This has been just incredible, an absolutely incredible presentation. And I appreciate you being outside in the wind and taking care of your visitors while you're taking care of us. That's
well, yeah, no worries. I had a great time. Thanks for allowing me to join you.
well, thank you.